best of situation happens for about the first 2 months after you're married. But then, you know, that is for the guy for the first 2 months. For the wife, it's probably the first 10 months, which means that next 8 months is really hell in the family if this is the way you're approaching it. Or marriage is an opportunity for intimacy and shared feelings. Actually, the guys think it's a time for intimacy. The girls, the women think it's a time for shared feelings. I heard something perfect on the radio coming out here about, this is for you women. This is in case you really want deep shared feelings with your husband as the goal of your marriage. This guy was talking about his son, his 17-year-old son was a junior in high school and had to make applications to colleges. So, and they make you, they make you fill out all kinds of stuff, but they make you write essays now. My son going into U of M medical school had to write 7 essays, different essays. So anyways, this was, his son had to write an essay, and one of the questions was, if you were a puppy dog, what kind of puppy would you be? So the father called up the school and talked to the counselor, said, what kind of a question is this? How's my son supposed to answer that? And the person at the other end said, well, just tell your son to dig deep inside to his feelings and to just express them in the essay. And the father thought for a minute and he answered and he said, lady, my son is 17 years old. He doesn't have any feelings deep inside. And actually, if he does, I don't think either you or me would want to know what they are. So it's kind of a funny thing, but sometimes if you go into marriage thinking this is an opportunity for deep oneness of shared feelings, you might find out that your spouse, especially if he's your husband, and you're expecting that, might not have as many feelings deep inside as you think. Okay, here's an observation about all of these ideas that Christians can have, because these are not the sinful ideas. But the thing is, yes, any of these things can happen in a marriage. It's not that those things never happen. But they are not the purpose for marriage. They are not why God made marriage. They better not be why you go into marriage. What they can be is a result of a husband and wife living a good time together in marriage. Like Chris said at the beginning of the meeting, trying to make sure that there's always 3 in this marriage, husband, wife, and God. If you work at that, if you live that way, if that's your goal, then a lot of these different things will happen at certain times. However, it's really important to know that all of these things I mentioned, they come and they go. They don't stay. And so if that's the way you judge your marriage and think that you need that to be married, then I can tell you right now, you're going to decide your marriage doesn't work. Because those things are not the purpose and the core of marriage. That's not why marriage is permanent. Okay, so what did God intend? How can we tell? Well, one of the ways is to take a look at how God initially set things up, what he told us. Like in the first talk, we mentioned the very first thing God said is it's not good for man to be alone. So it gives you an idea of God's intention. And so if we looked at marriage this way, we would see in Genesis 2:24, for example, therefore a man leaves his father and his mother, cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. So what does this tell us about God's intention? Well, it tells us it's supposed to be a personal relationship. And it tells us it's supposed to unite 2 people so that when you look at them, you won't just see 2 people anymore. You're going to see something else that's there, something new that's united. Part of that is very obvious in the wording, cleaving to each other. Part of that is a sexual union, and through Scripture, as it develops, especially in the Old and New Testament, in the laws and in the things that Jesus and Paul and the other apostles write, it's meant to be a personal, committed relationship together, and just with that one person. prostitute becomes one body with her? I don't think any of us would offhand have thought that that would be the first thing we think of when you say someone went to a prostitute. They become one body. So this shows the way God views sexuality and marriage. And Paul goes on to say, for it is written, the two shall become one flesh. So there is that. And then another thing we see in there, in the beginning, what God said in the beginning, in Genesis 1:28, he says, be fruitful and multiply. So right from the very beginning, part of what God's intention is for marriage is to have children and be fruitful and multiply. Now, of course, we all know, we know spiritually, we know practically from experience, and we know from biology that we cannot make children. God has to actually allow such a thing to happen. Although man doesn't really believe that, so he's bought a whole lot of petri dishes, and he's constantly working to try and make children. And he can sort of skirt around the thing if he has the right tools. But now they're actually believing, trying, that they can take a few chemicals and throw them together and make children themselves, and they don't even need God or the parts of people. So it's very interesting, because when you look at what God said, and then you look at what is happening, you just realize that society misses the boat. They don't understand anything about God's intention for marriage. And we need to be careful, because we live and hear this all the time. So it's just really good to hear what God intended, because when you hear it, you realize he intended it for our good and for his good. And another thing is that God intended marriage to build a people, to build community, to build the church. It's a place where you pass the faith, the understanding about God, onto the next generation. That's why it builds community. I mean, anyone can have a child, but that child is not going to be a child of, they're not going to understand and live their life for God. I mean, they'll be a child of God because he made them in that sense, but they're not going to have the faith to be able to live it and spread it and make a community where faith can flourish. What you need to do that is a community and families and community. That's the definition of the church, actually. Worldwide, it's faithful families raising and educating children and supporting one another. And Kata is a very practical expression of that desire and need for the church to grow. This has been a good weekend to write this talk, because while I was doing that, Ellen said, oh, do you want to hear about my Bible study this morning? And of course I didn't want to. I wanted to write the talk. However, next June 12th at 2 p.m., I will have celebrated my 40th wedding anniversary. And though I may not have feelings, and though I may not be oneness, I have learned some lessons. And so I said, yes, dear. Figuring in my mind, being a man, I can just close my ears and keep typing, and she'll think I'm listening to her. So much for oneness. Huh? Well, but then she's going on. It's very interesting. And one sentence just pops right out to me. So I became a hero, because she had to go do something else. The phone rang or something. So later that night, I asked her if she would open up her computer and find that sentence and read it to me again. So she knew I was listening. Okay, well, what it was, you know, the book of Sirach, chapter 44, verses 9 to 13, it said this. This is what she was, in her Bible study, that verse she was studying. It said, we sing the praises of the holy men in their generations.